Well, for more now on reaction from Ukraine, let's bring in Peter Zalmayev in Kyiv. Peter, you're the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Let's start with the referendum, with these planned for referendums. Putin says, quote, "We do not have the moral right to give up these people. Let's not forget there are people living in these regions who do genuinely want to be part of Russia and not Ukraine, and now fear any Ukrainian advance as well." Does Putin have a point here? Might there be people who really do want to rejoin Russia in those regions?
Well, there may have been more of those people before Putin decided to invade on February 24th. That number has dwindled ever since, when those people in those occupied territory got the full taste of what the Russian liberators are like after Bucha, after Mariupol, and after Izum, what the Ukrainians have discovered there when they discovered mass graves. So there's little desire for that right now. And obviously, whatever you heard from these so-called leaders of these so-called republics, Luhansk, Donetsk, parts of the other parts of the occupied territory. Obviously, this was orchestrated. Needless to say, this was not coming as their own initiative. It was rather Vladimir Putin's last-ditch effort to try to shape this war to look like a war of defense. So far, his efforts to try to mobilize a private army, private battalions to go fight in Ukraine have not materialized what they expected. And so I think this is a sign of huge despair that Vladimir Putin went on a limb in announcing so-called partial mobilization, simply because it's a realization that the way it's going, Russian army has come very close to being routed on the territory of Ukraine.
So this mobilization that Putin's talking about is basically a draft, if we're going to dumb it down for people. How will it work exactly? Who might be drafted?
Well, that's precisely what you hit the nail on its head with your question, because it's called partial mobilization. This is witness to the fact that Putin and his military leadership are afraid to death of calling it a full mobilization, simply because of the unpredictability of the popular response. It seems that Russians have very little desire to actually go and fight in this war, other than a passive sort of armchair kind of support that they have shown. And so it's couched in very tricky ways, and experts have been picking at it and unpacking what he said. And it looks like, though he said that it's going to be people who under 30, people who've already got military experience, people in the officer rank, it seems that when the push comes to shove, they can use this decree to pretty much draft anyone, except that they're not going to call it, like I said, a universal full mobilization.
Now, there was some very strong language from Putin earlier today in that address, particularly when he said this is not a bluff, again, emphasizing how many weapons Russia has. Just again, to remind everyone, Russia does have a nuclear weapon. This doesn't sound like a man who's trying to end the war, as perhaps the Turkish president suggested yesterday. What do you think? How far could this go?
Well, you know what? He's up against the wall, and he is between a rock and a hard place. He does not have good, ways out of it. He's also facing significant opposition from his purported allies: Erdogan of Turkey, Xi Jinping of China, Narendra Modi of India, who the other day at this summit in Uzbekistan told him, "We want you to wrap it up, finish this war." His calculation has been that if he were to withdraw now, this would be a death blow to his power and maybe his physical end. So he's banking on continuing this endlessly, hoping that to drag it out long enough to where Western allies of Ukraine will buckle under the cold winter, force Ukraine to come to the negotiating table, etc., because Vladimir Putin does not see a clear path to military victory. And at the end of the day, if the push comes to shove, he's shown willing to use nuclear as a blackmail. But once again, most military experts who have looked at it say that the use of tactical nuclear weapons will not immediately sway the military situation in Vladimir Putin's favor, and instead will turn his remaining allies against him. So it's going to be a very, very tricky move. No matter how you look at Vladimir Putin, is in a very tight spot.
Now, this reaction from Vladimir Putin seems to be linked, of course, to these recent losses for Russian troops in Ukraine. What's the situation like on the ground now between the Ukrainians and the Russian forces?
Ukrainians have shown marvelous, a marvelous success. Obviously, they have not kept up that sort of pace we saw when they started their counterattack in Kharkiv, but they are continuing. They're continuing to inch by inch to claim more territory, not only in that area but Luhansk. We are hearing reports that they liberated a town in Luhansk area. Kherson, the Russian army, which numbers about 30,000 troops there, are sandwiched between Ukrainian troops and the western bank of the Dnieper River, and their logistical supplies have been pretty much, disabled by Ukrainian, artillery, and so there's no clear way out for them, and that's another factor, I think, that went into Vladimir Putin's decision making. He sees that in the days to come, it's going to be harder and harder, not only to counterattack, but just to defend their positions, the positions that the Russian army currently occupies.
Peter, just to wrap up, what do you think the West should be doing now at this point, not only in its response to Vladimir Putin's comments this morning, but also just in general help for the Ukrainians in their quest to save their country?
Well, first of all, I've been encouraged by what I've heard so far. And, the Prime Minister of Netherlands, for example, said that we've heard this nuclear blackmail from Putin before. It doesn't bother, it doesn't affect us anymore. I think there's that realization that you can only meet this brute force with brute force. There's no negotiating with Vladimir Putin. And so I think the West has no other option but to step up its military support of Ukraine that has been so useful in, kicking the Russians out.
Peter, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Peter Zalmayev, they're speaking to me from Kyiv. Thanks so much.